layers and layers and layers of information are coming out, not just because objects are being examined in detail, but also because new technologies can be applied to them.
Was the mask created for Tutankhamun or for someone else?
In November 1922, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter knelt in the dust of the Valley of the Kings and chiseled a small hole into a sealed doorway that had not been touched in over 3,000 years. He held up a candle. The flame flickered against the darkness inside, and when his patron, Lord Carnarvon, asked if he could see anything, Carter famously answered, "Yes, wonderful things." What lay beyond that doorway would become the single most famous archaeological discovery in human history: the intact tomb of a minor, largely forgotten pharaoh named Tutankhamun. Buried within 4 gilded shrines, 3 nested coffins, and a mountain of treasure was one object that would go on to find an entire civilization in the modern imagination: a golden funerary mask, weighing over 22 pounds, inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, turquoise, and glass. For a century, that mask has been treated as a perfect, untouchable symbol of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship. But for almost as long, a quiet unease has followed it. Small inconsistencies, details that don't quite fit the story we've been told. And in recent years, a new generation of imaging technology has reopened questions that Egyptologists thought were long settled. Questions about who this mask was actually made for, and whether the face the world reveres as Tutankhamun's was originally meant to belong to someone else entirely. To understand why this mystery exists at all, you have to understand the chaos surrounding Tutankhamun's death. He died around 1323 BCE, likely in his late teens, and the exact cause is still debated: a badly broken leg that became infected, malaria, or some combination of ailments compounding a frail, inbred body. What matters for this story is that his death appears to have been sudden and, crucially, unplanned. Egyptian royal burial required an enormous, multi-year undertaking: a rock-cut tomb, wall paintings, a stone sarcophagus, nested coffin, and thousands of ritual objects meant to equip the king for eternity. Pharaohs typically began preparing their tombs the moment they took the throne. Tutankhamun, who became king around age 9 and died around age 18 or 19, simply hadn't had the time. An Egyptian religious law demanded burial within roughly 70 days of death, tied to the mummification process. Whoever was in charge of Tutankhamun's funeral had 10 weeks to finish a job that should have taken years. The evidence of that scramble is written all over the tomb itself. It's tiny, embarrassingly small by the standards of royal burials, more in keeping with the tomb of a nobleman than a king. Some of the wall paintings show signs of haste, with figures and hieroglyphs that art historians have long described as unusually crude for a royal commission. The stone sarcophagus has chipped corners, suggesting it may have been forced into a burial chamber that wasn't originally built to hold it. And several objects in the tomb weren't made for Tutankhamun at all. Some pieces of jewelry, several small shrine figures, and at least a few coffins recovered from the tomb bear the unmistakable traces of having been altered, names scraped away and recarved, cartouches reworked. This wasn't a secret. Egyptologists have known and written about it for decades. The question that has always lingered in the background is simple. If other objects in the tomb were recycled from elsewhere, was the mask one of them too? The person most closely associated with the theory that it was is Nefertiti. She is arguably the second most recognizable face in Egyptian history after Tutankhamun himself, thanks to her painted limestone bust housed in Berlin's Neues Museum. The long, elegant neck, the flat-top blue crown, the enigmatic half-smile. Nefertiti was a great royal wife of the pharaoh Akhenaten, the so-called heretic king, who upended Egyptian religion by promoting worship of a single sun-disk god, Aten, and relocated the capital to a new city built for the purpose. Akhenaten was almost certainly Tutankhamun's father or close relative, which makes Nefertiti either Tut's mother, stepmother, or aunt, depending on which reconstruction of this famously murky family tree you favor. What makes Nefertiti central to this mystery is what happened after Akhenaten's death. The historical record around that period is a mess of erased names, destroyed monuments, and short, mysterious reigns, but a growing body of scholarship, led for years by figures like Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves, has argued that Nefertiti may have ruled Egypt in her own right, possibly under the throne name Enkhepur Neferneferutin, before Tutankhamun took the throne as a child. And then, just as significantly, she disappears. No confirmed tomb. No confirmed mummy. A queen who may have been pharaoh, erased almost completely from the record in the years that followed. That combination, a queen who vanished and a boy king buried in a hurry with recycled goods, is exactly the kind of gap history invites you to fill with theory. And the mask gave theorists something concrete to point to: the ears. On Tutankhamun's death mask, both earlobes are pierced, a detail visible to anyone who has stood in front of the case at the museum. In New Kingdom Egyptian art, pierced ears were strongly associated with children and, separately, with depictions of queens and princesses. Adult male pharaohs in their formal, eternal, official imagery essentially never appear with pierced ears. It's a small detail, but in a culture where every element of royal iconography was governed by strict convention, it's a strange one. Scholars have offered competing explanations for decades that the piercings reflect Tutankhamun's youth, since he was a boy when many of his possessions were made, or that the mask's face was originally sculpted for use earlier in his life and simply never modified. But the detail has never fully gone away as a source of debate, precisely because it sits right at the intersection of two known facts: that other tomb objects were repurposed, and that a possible female pharaoh vanished from history around the same period. The event that actually tested these theories against hard evidence happened in 2015, and it started with an accident. During a lighting fixture repair inside the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, museum staff removed the mask from its display case, and in the process, the mask's long, braided ceremonial beard, a separate piece attached at the chin, symbolizing divine kingship, snapped off. What happened next became an international scandal in its own right. Instead of calling in trained conservators immediately, museum staff reportedly used a fast-drying epoxy adhesive, the kind more suited to plumbing repairs than 3,000-year-old gold artifacts, to glue the beard back into place. The repair was sloppy enough that visitors and staff noticed a visible smear of dried glue around the mask's chin, and photos leaked online, triggering outrage from Egyptologists and the public alike. It was, by any measure, an embarrassing failure to protect one of the most valuable and universally recognized objects on Earth. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities responded by bringing in an international team of conservators, led by the German restorer Christian Ekman, who had decades of experience working with ancient gold artifacts. Ekman's job was to carefully remove the epoxy without damaging the mask further and reattach the beard properly, using techniques and materials the ancient Egyptians themselves might have recognized, such as beeswax-based adhesives. But before doing any of that delicate restoration work, Ekman's team took the opportunity to do something that had never been done before at this level of detail. They ran a full non-invasive material analysis of the mask using X-ray fluorescence, or XRF, spectroscopy. XRF works by bombarding material with X-rays and measuring the specific energy signatures that bounce back, which reveals the elemental composition of the material at that exact point, essentially a chemical fingerprint, without touching or damaging the object. The goal was straightforward. If the face of the mask had, at some point, been swapped or reworked using gold from a different source or a different era, the elemental composition of the gold in that section should differ, even slightly, from the gold used elsewhere on the mask. Different gold alloys, different ratios of gold to silver to copper, different trace element signatures from different ore sources. Leave a chemical trail that doesn't disappear just because the surface has been polished smooth. Ekman's team spent weeks methodically scanning nearly every surface of the mask, and Egyptian Antiquities officials publicized some findings, though full peer-reviewed publication of the complete dataset has, notably, remained limited and is still something Egyptologists outside the original team have called for. According to the results that were shared, the gold composition of the mask's face was broadly consistent with the gold composition of the rest of the headdress, and no obvious solder seams or foreign material were detected joining the face to the rest of the mask. Officially, this was treated by museum authorities as evidence against the theory that the mask had been assembled from mismatched parts. But here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, rather than manufactured, because the XRF results didn't actually close the debate the way many news outlets reported at the time. Independent Egyptologists and material scientists who were not part of Ekman's original team pointed out real, legitimate limitations of the method. XRF spectroscopy is extremely good at detecting elemental composition, but ancient Egyptian goldsmiths were remarkably skilled metallurgists who worked with a limited number of known gold sources, primarily from Nubian mines, meaning gold used in different objects from the same period and region can share very similar compositions even if it was worked, reworked, or combined at different times. A close compositional match doesn't necessarily rule out that two pieces of gold, mined from similar sources within the same few decades, were joined together. It simply means the elements present are similar, which several critics argue was always likely regardless of the mask's true assembly history. In other words, the test that supposedly settled the question was, by its own nature, not capable of definitively settling it. It could rule out some scenarios, but it could not rule out the specific scenario that had made the Nefertiti theory compelling in the first place. Two pieces of contemporaneous, similarly sourced royal gold, worked by the same workshop tradition, joined together under extreme time pressure. Complicating things further, the full raw dataset from the 2015 analysis has never been made broadly available for independent, peer-reviewed reanalysis by outside researchers, which is unusual for a finding of this cultural and historical significance. Several Egyptologists have noted, sometimes pointedly, that a genuinely conclusive answer would require either a level of technical transparency that hasn't yet been provided or new, more sophisticated non-invasive techniques. The kind capable of detecting not just elemental composition, but the physical history of the metal itself, including evidence of reheating, reworking, and mechanical stress at a microscopic level. That kind of forensic metallurgy exists in research laboratories today, applied to modern manufacturing and material science, but has not, as of now, been publicly applied to Tutankhamun's mask in any comprehensive, published way. The door on this question, in other words, isn't closed. It's ajar, and has been for years, waiting for either better access or better instruments. This is also where the pierced ears and stylistic questions about the face re-enter conversation, because they were never actually resolved by the 2015 chemical analysis. That test only spoke to the masked material composition, not to its artistic history. Art historians have separately noted for decades that the facial style of Tutankhamun's mask is somewhat distinct in its delicacy and proportions from other confirmed depictions of the young king found elsewhere in the tomb, such as the guardian statues or his second, innermost solid gold coffin, whether that reflects deliberate artistic variation, the work of a different sculptor within the same royal workshop, or something more significant, remains a matter of genuine scholarly disagreement rather than settled consensus in either direction. Nicholas Reeves, whose Nefertiti-related theories have generated significant attention and significant criticism in roughly equal measure, has focused most of his own high-profile research not on the mask directly, but on the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb itself, arguing based on radar and scanning surveys that there may be sealed, undiscovered chambers behind painted plaster, chambers he has speculated could belong to Nefertiti, with Tutankhamun's tomb having been built as a hasty extension, grafted onto a pre-existing royal burial. Multiple radar surveys conducted since 2015 have produced conflicting results, some suggesting voids exist behind the walls, others finding no evidence of hidden chambers at all, and the Egyptian government has not authorized invasive exploration to settle the question definitively. The mask theory and the hidden chamber theory are separate claims, often conflated in popular retellings, but they share the same underlying logic, that Tutankhamun's rushed, chaotic burial may have quietly absorbed pieces, objects, spaces, even a face, that belonged to the vanished queen who came before him. So where does that leave us? Honestly, not with a dramatic, secret confirmation kept from the public, and not with a case that's been definitively closed either. What we actually have is a mask with real, documented, unresolved oddities, pierced ears that don't match typical adult pharaoh iconography, a facial style some specialists find stylistically distinct from other confirmed images of the king, and a chemical analysis that, despite being reported in the press as conclusive, has real methodological limits that its own critics within Egyptology have raised in academic venues. We have a tomb that was unmistakably assembled in a hurry, with objects known to have been repurposed from other burials. We have a queen who may have ruled as pharaoh and who vanished from the historical record almost without a trace. And we have a scientific question that, as of now, has not been closed with the kind of transparent, independently verifiable data that would let historians say with full confidence exactly whose face that mask was built to represent when the gold was first poured 3,300 years ago. Maybe future imaging technology, genuinely capable, published, peer-reviewed metallurgical forensics, rather than a single limited compositional scan, will finally answer question one way or the other. Maybe it will confirm that the mask has always simply been Tutankhamun's, pierced ears and all, a product of his youth and the particular artistic choices of his workshop. Or maybe it will confirm what some Egyptologists have suspected for decades, that in the panic of a 10-week deadline, the priests of the dead boy king reached for whatever gold was already consecrated and ready, and that the most famous face in the ancient world was never entirely his own to begin with, until that evidence exists and is made public. The honest answer isn't a secret discovery. It's an open question. And in a field built on piecing together a civilization from fragments, sometimes the open